Good afternoon and welcome back to another ironic introduction to another video. Happy holiday for all of us playing the game. Kabam sent out Awakening Gems or Awakening Gem Crystals, kind of progression based. And with that being given out for this holiday, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, well, who do I awaken? Where should I invest these resources? Who's really worth it? What's the SIG? What's the benefit? What am I getting out of this? And I'm stepping in here to finally put my 2 cents in on who I think are the best champions to awaken and why. I pride myself on being incredibly thorough, so I will have timestamps in the description below going for each class: Science, Skill, Mutant, Tech, Cosmic, and Mystic. And I am going to explain each champion, champion by champion in each class. So I'll start at the top of the class list and I'll work my way down, kind of explaining the value, the reason for why I think, whether or not they benefit significantly just from one SIG level, whether or not you want them maxed, etc. So that said, if you're looking for a specific champion, you're going to have to sift your way, but at least there will be a shortcut for the class. So you can at least sift your way through, roughly 1/6 of the champions instead. So that said, I have just a very simple key here. So if there is a parentheses 1, that means that champion has a great value at 1 SIG level, which is incredibly important when you're talking about awakening gems because they will only have 1 SIG level when you awaken. The greater than symbol means that that champion is better with the higher SIG, and it's not just better with higher SIG, but specifically meaning like this champion does not need to be maxed to get the value out of the awakening ability, but there is enough of a value to SIG them up that I think it's worth mentioning. Next up, I have max in parentheses, which means you actively want to max SIG this champion. Quickest example is Captain America Infinity War. Max SIG gives him 100% chance to get everything you're getting out of his awakened ability. Because of that, you want him maxed. You don't want to be playing with RNG, but not every champion wants max. Some champions just want higher SIG and don't necessarily need to be maxed to really be optimal. Next up, we have this star symbol. The star symbol will be specifically after the greater than symbol because that will mean there is a specific SIG level optimization that I am recommending or I think is worth pointing out. Now, that being said, keep in mind that especially with this star symbol, that this game has a lot of different content, and so there are going to be varying examples. Also, I am not a perfect player. I haven't even played all of these champions. This is just me taking what I can from research and knowledge and understanding of the game and doing what I can to provide it to the rest of the community. So if you feel like I'm missing something on this list, there's a champion that may be higher or lower than you think, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you think there's a specific SIG level on a champion, you're like, hey, Jay, this champion really, really wants to be this SIG level and you don't need to go any higher, let me know because that's what this part is for, and I'd like to be able to add it in the future. I'm planning on coming back maybe like 6 months to 8 months from now when a good deal, 12 or 14 more champions are in the game, and I can reevaluate this list accordingly. So that said, I'll put a timestamp here for science and let's get right into it. So Captain America Infinity War, if you know anything about science champions, he should be the first one on your radar because Captain America Infinity War gets this retinue or this cornucopia of utility, of just utility god in a champion who does insane amounts of damage, has awesome amount of block, and so with Captain America, you really, really, really want him maxed. And if you don't have him maxed, at the very least, you want him to be high SIG. And that is because all of his awakened abilities, the 6 different class-based effects, have a percentage chance to proc based on his signature level. So if he's maxed, you get them 100% of the time. You don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to trigger. But if he's not max SIG, then you're just kind of relying on RNG to, help you out on that coin toss or that die roll. So essentially, when you have Captain America Infinity War awakened, you have to bring synergies from all 6 classes. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a specific champion, just needs to be someone in that class. So if you bring a mutant, you get chance on triggering a special 1 to gain 1 kinetic potential. Skill, chance to, when a debuff is gained, to consume 1 kinetic potential to purify it. Science, chance on a well-timed block to place a weakness debuff. Mystic, chance to gain 1 kinetic potential each time a buff expires. Cosmic, chance to apply an armor break on a well-timed block. And Tech, chance on a well-timed block to place a petrified debuff. Now, namely, it's the Armor Break, the Petrify, and the Shrug of buffs and debuffs that makes Cap Infinity War so amazing. So that's really what you're looking for, but that is what makes Cap so great. So next up, we have Void, and Void gets this 1 number because what makes Void really, really good is his ability to apply Heal Reversal. Now, Heal Reversal is essentially when you have enough Petrify effects and heal reduction on the opponent that the healing ability of that champion actually hits negative. So if they were healing health, they would instead be losing a proportion of that health instead. Now, with Void, the problem is he passively generates these debuffs on the opponent up to 6, 2, 2, 2, 2 Petrify, 2 Weakness, 2 something else, I forget. And the Petrify debuffs will eventually prevent any kind of healing on the opponent because it's 50% healing reduction each. But when Void hits 6 debuffs and he's unawakened, all of the debuffs are shrugged off the opponent and you restart. When you have 1 Sig level in Void, instead of shrugging all 6 debuffs immediately, they instead get something called Fear of the Void, which is all 6 of the debuffs wrapped in 1, and then you continue wrapping on additional debuffs, and this really makes Void so much better. It goes from having a short uptime window for your debuffs being maximized to having a uptime window of your debuffs being applied, and then just constantly having them applied from there. And the reason you want him to be higher Sig is that once you have that Fear of the Void, your debuffs start placing faster, and you get a Fury buff, and that Fury buff and the rate at which your debuffs start to apply faster after the Fear of the Void is present is significantly higher with a higher Sig level. So that's what you're looking for there. And for me, I think that these are the only 2 champions worth using a generic Awakening Gem on. Not that these other 5 champions aren't great, it's just that these 2 champions are so great game breaking that they're really, really, really are worth that generic. Bear in mind though, I do personally feel Cap is only worth it if you're gonna commit at least like 39 Sig Stones into him. If you can commit 39 Sig Stones into him, that's when I'd say you can definitely feel comfortable putting that generic in, because the worst thing is like popping a generic on Cap, not putting any 6 stones in him, and then duping him. And then it's just like, well, that feels really bad. So just kind of a heads up there. Next up is Hulk Ragnarok. So Hulk Ragnarok on Awaken ability, when either he or the opponent hit 20%, he has a chance, pretty much a coin toss, to either generate a Fury or a Regeneration. And the reason he benefits so high at Sig level 1 is that Regeneration and the Fury is a solid percentage at Sig 1. But the higher Sig he is, the higher that Regeneration, the higher that Fury. And it's a pretty hefty Fury, pretty hefty Regeneration, because let's face it, you're probably hoping for that Regeneration flip, and it's a really good time, makes him a great quester, save you a lot of potions. Next up we have Thing, and I'm thinking about putting the max symbol next to Thing here, but Thing's Awakened ability essentially is a protection shielding. So when he's stunned, when he's hit by a special, he essentially gains a protection that prevents or reduces the amount of damage he takes over the next 5 seconds, and it's a flat percentage plus the number of rock stacks he has. At max Sig, you can actually prevent 100% of the incoming damage for 5 seconds, which is absolutely crazy. It's something you can use to like tank special 3s with, even fully mitigate the value of recoil. So I definitely think it's highly worth noting, and I think some god tier Thing play would allow you to really, really mitigate insane amounts of damage. But for the most part, you can just put like 40 or 60 Sigs in there and slowly build your way up and just reap in the prestige reward accordingly. Next up is Human Torch. If Human Torch has a 0 persistent charges, and his persistent charges is what you activate in order to let him apply Nova Flames instead of just passive incinerates. He can apply Nova Flames regularly, but using his Awakened ability gives you Nova Flames automatically for the entire duration of the fight. And what's important about Nova Flames is that it's a passive damage over time effect, which means, let's say the opponent is immune to debuffs. Well, they're not immune to Nova Flames. Nova Flames are passive debuffs. At least at the point of making this video, they're passive debuffs. So that might be a bug. Be mindful of it. Check up on that to make sure that if you're using that Awakening Gem at the time that you're using it, that's not fixed or anything like that. But at this moment, he can passively debuff immune champions, which means you can bring Human Torch and use him to heal reverse champions that, you know, might not be heal reversible otherwise. And it's a really, really good time, and his Awaken ability pretty much allows you a percentage chance to get that persistent charge back. Now, it's not a very high percentage chance, and even max Awakened, it's not super high either, but just having a chance to get that persistent charge back is really important, because otherwise you really only get one. And in like an Alliance War, you're probably only gonna get one anyway, so I wouldn't rely on it, but it's still nice to have and something to think about. Next up, we have Luke Cage. Luke Cage has a indestructibility he gains when awakened, and when it's higher sig, the cooldown actually goes down. So let me actually go ahead and give him that up arrow as well. But for the most part, you're just using that awakened ability to tank special 3s, maybe fix it up play if you make a mistake or anything like that. But for the most part, you don't need anything higher than that. Next up, we have Red Hulk. Now, Red Hulk, his Awakened ability lets him start with 2 heat charges, and heat charges give him Incinerate damage resistance. Now, for that reason, I have him at star 33, because star 33 sig level is the sig level at which he gets 10% Incinerate damage resistance. That means if you have 10 heat charges, which is the maximum amount for Red Hulk, you are 100% damage resistant to Incinerate. So that's like the optimal. If you build Red Hulk up to 10 heat charges, then you would be 100% Incinerate immune, essentially, so long as there's not like Incinerate damage up, etc. So that's science. We'll move on to skill, and you know, again, I apologize for the length of this, but you know, hopefully you are using the spreadsheet to go through quicker. But next up for skill, we have Aegon. Aegon you want to have maxed, because you want to be carrying over that combo. Now, he's at the top of this list for generics, strictly because Aegon isn't really a good champion unless he's awakened. And so for that reason, I think he belongs at the top of Awakened priority for skill. Otherwise, you shouldn't even consider ranking this guy up, because he's almost virtually useless if he's not awakened. Now, once awakened, you want to max sig him, because the higher his sig level, the more combo carryover. Now, granted, he doesn't need to be maxed in order to be optimal, and in fact, you know, he is well worthy of, we'll give him the up arrow as well, because you could maybe say put like 80 to 100 in and then call it a day. All that means is you're going to have some longer ramp ups, but even then, you're going to want to actively put a good deal of 6 stones into this guy, maybe 80, 100, maybe even like 140, 160, if not maxing him, especially since the times you're going to use him is going to be in some really long content, and it might help you min-max that perfectly. Anybody who's used Aegon can probably give me or comment a better idea of really when the sig level optimizes, because I'm sure there's a rough sig level ideology there, but I personally don't use him. So if you have that information, comment it below. Next up, we have Nick Fury. Nick Fury at Sig 1 gets essentially the real Nick Fury phase, where once he dies, he activates life model, he deploys a life model replacement that would, you know, to die instead of him. He heals back up to 100%, degenerates back down to 30%, and essentially the sig level here affects the rate at which he degenerates, which goes from like 5 to like 2.33% per second. So yes, you want him at higher sig to prevent how fast you die, but he's going to hit 30 no matter what, and it doesn't matter, because the amount of damage he is outputting, he will just obliterate anyone, and you're going to be playing full intercept, full evade playstyle with Nick Fury anyways. He's a high skill tier champion, so really I feel like you don't need to invest many sig levels into him to really feel optimal. Next up, we have Blade. Blade, once awakened, accesses the ability to regenerate health up to 70% by holding block and draining his own power bar. The higher the sig level, the less power is consumed for an equivalent amount of health, or essentially you can gain more health per power. And so you kind of want him to be a higher sig to get more healing out of him, but even at like sig 20, this man heals incredibly fast. You really don't need to invest that many sig stones into him to feel very good, so you can't feel comfortable with that 1 sig and just having, you know, even a modest heal out of him consistently. Next up is Gwenpool. Gwenpool at Sig 1 can tank special 3s. The higher the Sig level, the less damage you're going to be taking from specials in general when you tank them. But for the most part, you only need her at Sig 1 in order to infinitely tank special 3s. As long as you're not blocking, as long as you're only intercepting, and as long as you're only tanking special 3s, Gwenpool could theoretically tank an infinite amount of special 3s. Taskmaster. Taskmaster is an absolute beast. I feel like if you have a super high IQ, this man could do incredible things for you. Now, his Awaken ability is a tad bit complicated, but essentially every time you concuss the opponent or successfully trigger an exploit weakness, you get a concussion debuff on the opponent, and that concussion debuff, once placed 5, you will get a convert a passive effect which will reduce their ability accuracy by a number to a higher number based on Sig level. And so essentially with Taskmaster, you have a little timer where the most recent attack that the opponent did, if you execute that attack with Taskmaster, you will exploit the opponent's weakness, and once he's awakened, you will get a concussion. So essentially, it's if your opponent can be stunned, you go like stun, exploit weakness, heavy attack to reset the exploit weakness, and then you'll go parry, do the exploited weakness attack, heavy attack, and you'll rinse and repeat 5 times until you get ability accuracy reduction, and it's a really great time. Taskmaster deserves his own 20-minute video explanation. I don't play him, but if you are a god Taskmaster, this guy can do so many wonderful things for you. So just kind of keep that on your radar if you've been overlooking him or maybe feel like he's underpowered. This guy does great things. Next up is Black Widow, standard Black Widow. Now her awakened ability is ability accuracy reduction when she's hitting the opponent. I feel like Black Widow has gone really quiet in these days because she's just been overshadowed and definitely power crept in the game. I am not recommending anyone to awaken her, but if you love Black Widow, know that her awakened ability allows her to pummel into like Thing, pummel into Magic, pummel into so many champions who have defensive ability accuracy. Black Widow will just prevent those things from triggering ever. Like you won't see Limbo, you won't see Rock Stacks generate. She ignores Thorns because Thorns is considered a ability accuracy for the most part, and it is true. This even counteracts Psychic Thorns unless Psychic Thorns is bugged when you're using her, but Kabam has said that they want Black Widow to work against that. So there's a lot of interactions where she just becomes super relevant and feels really good. It's just that she's definitely lost value as so many other champions do exactly the same thing but better. But hey, if you're a huge Black Widow fan, that just should be on your radar, and she really needs to be awakened and max Sig really to have any kind of value, or at least very high Sig, because you want that ability accuracy reduction to be super high, since that's really the only utility you're getting out of her. Next up, we have Stealth Suit Spidey. At Sig 1, he gets 10% increased Fury potency. At higher Sig, he gets all the way up to 40. Ronin at Sig 1, he essentially, when you have 7 cruelties or you've built your way up to 7 cruelties, he will evade the next attack for a duration period of time. So essentially it's a small window where if you were to get hit, he would evade instead. It's a little buggy, but when it works, it feels great, and when you do it intentionally, it feels amazing when you use this to like dodge specials like War Machine Special 1. Personally, I think you want him to be around Sig 40 to 60 at the very least, just to get something out of him, because evading one hit doesn't really feel good. And even then, you want him even higher Sig just to be able to dodge like really annoying specials when that time comes. But Ronin's value is still great without his awakened ability, just kind of something to think about. Night Thrasher at Sig 1, he essentially unlocks the ability to get like a taunt, as well as the ability to purify all debuffs when he's knocked down, as well as striking the opponent can give him a fury buff. This really is what gives Night Thrasher the insane amounts of damage he has the potential to unleash, and you're going to want him high Sig. Kind of like Darkhawk, Night Thrasher has access to similar damage rating ratios on his Awakened ability. Killmonger, his Reverberation is on his Awakened ability. This really is only for a defender purpose, but I would be doing him a disservice if I didn't mention the value of his Awakened ability, especially on defense. Korg, this is the ability that allows him to potentially shrug stuns, also a defender ability. I think it has a little bit more on it, but I'm not too keen on it. I think that's the Rockstacks one. So essentially, if you're using Killmonger or Korg, you really want them to be awakened for defense, but generally speaking, I don't even think they're worth class-specific awakening gems, since you should probably use it on one of these before. Next up for Mutant, we have Omega Red. Omega Red is probably the best Mutant awakening gem you can spend, in my opinion. Because he almost has to be awakened in order to be good, because you're really not getting any damage out of him. His awakened ability is when you have 10 or more death spores on the opponent. The death spores deal passive damage to the opponent. Additionally, Omega Red has a percentage chance to go unblockable on a medium hit or any tentacle hit, really. So I think that applies to his special too as well. And this is a really good feeling because this is where he gets all of his initial burst, but you really want him to be at least SIG 80, if not higher, to really feel the benefit of that damage. And if he's not awakened, you're honestly probably better off using anyone else because the damage is really low elsewise. Next up, we have Archangel. Archangel awakened. His neurotoxins give ability accuracy reduction, and the reason I have star 110 is because at 110 sig level, the ability accuracy reduction is 33.25%. That means at 3 neurotoxins you have almost exactly 100%, or rather 99.75% ability accuracy reduction. So 110, 120 if you want to round off on a 20, because that's really the numbers you should be going for on 5 stars is circumvents of 20. Numbers of 20. Archangel is, able to essentially get 100% ability accuracy reduction against opponents with 3 neurotoxins. Even if you max hit him, it only goes up to 40%. So, that 110 really is the sweet spot since you want 3 neurotoxins anyways. Next up is Namor. Now, Namor, I do still have worth an awakening gem here. The thing is just that Namor's awakened ability essentially gives him the ability to reflect damage onto the opponent that he would be taking while he's attacking. And what that's key for is suicides, right? So while you have suicides and willpower active, you're healing. And more importantly, thorns. Korg, Electro, Psychic Thorns, the incinerate damages that you're taking, if you're attacking a Mephisto, those kinds of abilities, that's really what Namor is for. The thing is that it's only 100% when he's maxed. So if you don't have a maxed out Namor, you're still taking damage, which means that you probably should have brought someone better. It's still good to have once he's high sigged, but you really want him to be maxed so that you're reflecting 100% of that damage back. Next up, we have Colossus. Now, this is Colossus after the rework. His awakened ability gives him the chance to gain an armor up buff whenever his immunities protect him, but more importantly, whenever a armor up buff would fall off, he has a chance to convert it into a permanent one instead. Just having that chance is really going to help you out in longer fights. It's not needed for shorter fights since a lot of times they'll be dead from multiple heavies and a special 2 anyways, but particularly in those medium to long ones, you're going to be really grateful for the higher armor ups, which makes you tankier, but more importantly, increases your amount of damage with Colossus. Havoc, his awakened ability gives you anywhere from a 25 to, I want to say 40%, 25 to 55% chance to get a second plasma charge every time he would gain a plasma charge from any other source than the awakened ability. So just at Sig 1, it's a 25%, and max Sig, it's 55%. Essentially, this is a 25% chance or 25% increase in plasma charge gain. Because, right, if you gain 1 in every 4, that's going to be a rough 25%. Some fights it'll be less, some fights it'll be more, just kind of reliant on RNG. But essentially, plasma charges is his main source of damage in the form of prowess on a special 3, or if you are heavy attacking the opponent in the form of that dot. And really having a higher plasma charge rate is going to give you a higher damage rate, which feels good. Iceman's awakened ability at Sig 1 gives him a True Strike passive on Frostbites. So all of his Frostbites give, or all of his Cold Snap debuffs give Iceman the ability to where he can't be evaded. So every time you would attack an opponent, their evades don't work. Having him at Sig 1 means you have 12 seconds of a cold snap applied at the start of the fight. So that means 12 seconds of no evading, and then you can just spam special ones from there to essentially ignore any evade effects from champions. And the only reason I have higher Sig value here is because the higher the Sig value means that you're going to get a higher cold snap damage out of him once at the start of the fight, which is nice to have, but really only important if you're using him as a defender. If you're using him as an attacker, the Awaken ability is almost purely essentially anti-evade. Sunspot's Awaken ability is an increase to maximum number of solar charges. I feel like this is relevant because if you're using Sunspot, one of the frustrations is running out of solar charges. His special 3 does reset you back up to max, which is very convenient. But I think that as we see longer and longer content, especially for Sunspot, it's going to be nicer to have a larger pool of solar charges to be working off of. But it's only 1 at Sig 1, so you really want him to have higher Sig level to get closer to the maximum number, which is a 40 additional, to be valuable. Domino's Awakened ability is the ability to give opponents taking damage every time one of their abilities would fail to trigger. It's nice, and it's mostly a defender one, but again, I would be doing a disservice to not mention it, but I wouldn't use an Awakening gem on that. Apologies, team. Halfway through. Next up, we have Ghost. Now, Ghost is one of my favorite champions in the game. And I personally feel she's worth an Awakening gem. I personally feel she's worth an Awakening gem and max Sig. And I have good arguments for that, but I'll go into that another day. For now, the first Sig level essentially means that you phase at the start of the fight, which completely changes kind of the dynamics of how you fight against the opponents, because you'd be surprised how much dodging at the start of the fight just completely alters the AI profile, and you're going to have a much more passive AI when you dodge at the start of the fight. They're going to like dodge back first, and they might dodge back, dash in, or they might dodge back, hold block, and you find yourself in a position where your first phase was completely useless, and then you're having to play around like either stalling or building up to another phase, all the while losing a lot of distance. At Sig 60 is where I really felt a difference in the power gain from taking missed hits, and at Sig 200 is where you can very comfortably, very comfortably get to a special 2 before your opponent has even gotten to a special 1. So just something to keep in mind. Next up is Doc Ock. At Sig 1, Doc Ock, when the opponent is power locked, he drains... So Doc Ock's means that with each of his research categories and 6, his breakthrough is replaced by a new effect. For physics, he drains 100% of power gained and steals 5.71 to 15% of the power drained. So essentially, when you're hitting into a power locked opponent, you're power draining them as well, which is essentially they gain a little bit of power and they gain the power, but the same amount of power they're gaining, you're stealing back. This is at Sig 20. That's what my Doc Ock does. Chemistry, you deal direct damage equal to about 100% of health gained, and life steal 20 to 30% of the damage done. So when they're heal blocked, you get a nice little life steal. And biology is the armor break one, which gives you armor penetration. But really the two you'll be feeling on an Awakened Doc Ock are the power lock effect and the heal block effect. And let me tell you how important the power drain is, because once awakened, Doc Ock is a hardcore Havoc counter, because Havoc passively power gains, and that means the power lock will automatically apply even if you don't even do anything. You just kind of wait around, wait for Doc Ock's passive to build up to 100, the breakthrough triggers, and power lock on the Havoc. If you hit the Havoc while he is power locked, every time, every single hit is going to be a power drain. All of the plasma charges are falling off Havoc. It's a great time. But more importantly, it's going to let you hit your special 2 rotation. It's going to let you hit higher damage, and it's just going to be very good feelings. So personally, I think he's worth a generic, because there's also multiple other fights where having that power drain is going to be really relevant. So I just wanted to keep that up there for now. Let me know how you think about that, because I don't know if everybody's going to agree that Doc Ock is worth a generic. Next up, we have Stark Spidey. Stark Enhanced Spidey, his Awakened ability is when he's above 50% health. His taunts last 2 additional seconds, so that's flat. Excuse me. And he gets 284 to 510 additional crit rating per poise, which means that essentially at max 10 poises, he could have all the way up to an additional 5,000 crit rate, which, to kind of give you an idea, Stark Spidey's base crit rate, at least as per Aunt Mai, is 944. So that's almost 600% of his crit rate, or 500% additional, which is really high crit rate in comparison. Next up on the radar is Guillotine 2099. The value you're getting there is a combo shield. Now, the reason I have her at max is because once it's maxed, it's 100% chance to gain a combo shield when she would be struck. Now, sub max, it's still, you can get a very high percentage, 70, 90, etc. But if you're going to be getting hit with Guillotine 2099, you want to at least have the comfort of getting a guaranteed power combo shield, because if you get hit and you lose your shield, she's just like Star-Lord. Rip goes your damage. You're gonna have to re-ramp. So having that safety net is a really good feeling, but also you get a little bit more than that. While under the effects of a combo shield, damage from incoming attacks, excluding the special 3, is capped at 10% of Guillotine's max health. So if for some reason you're getting struck maybe by like an unblockable special 2 or something like that, you will know that at the very least you won't die and you won't lose your combo. So that's a good feeling there. Next up, we have Darkhawk. But I should comment that that's excluding special 3s. So you can't infinite tank special 3s like you can with Gwenpool. You can't even tank special 3s at all, which just feels kind of like a little bit of a jip. But hey, the combo shield is a strong enough value as is. Now, Darkhawk really accesses a lot of his value on his Awakened ability. Just awakening him gives him a 10% ability to auto block while in shield mode, 10% chance to 10% increased offensive power rate while in stealth mode, and a small percentage increase in attack rating while in null mode. But max sig, it goes all the way up to 100% chance to auto block, or if you have parry mastery active, that's a parry, 60% increased offensive power rate while in stealth mode, and a huge 3,169 or 100% theory while in null mode. So Darkhawk really benefits from both having his Awakened ability and specifically a very high sig. Star-Lord's damage comes from his ability to generate a combo meter, which gives him passive increased damage. In order to get that, he has to be awakened. The higher the Awakened ability, the higher amount of damage he's getting per the combo meter. Sentinel's Awakened ability is whenever the opponent activates a special attack and then activates the same special attack, he gains 20 analysis charge. Now, if you were to increase the signature level, abilities that cause Sentinel to lose power are less effective, but it's almost useless. Like, you really don't need to worry about that because you shouldn't be having to worry about power drains that much against Sentinel in general. So really you just need him at Sig 1 to get the maximum value as an attacker out of Sentinel, and then you can move on from there. Next up is Mysterio. He gets a generation of a chemical gas every 20 to 6 seconds. Now, the higher sig level obviously is going to make him a lot more consistent in chemical gas production, but just having it means that you're getting a consistent source of chemical gas every X seconds. Warlock's Awakened ability is a degeneration whenever the opponent is power drained or power burned, but it's not the biggest amount of damage, and Warlock really, if you're using Warlock, you're using him for the great amounts of utility he has, and this damage isn't exactly game breaking, so like I have him there, but I really feel like if you have any kind of gem, you should probably save it for someone else. Iron Man Infinity Wars, his Awakened ability is mostly a defensive thing. When he hits 15%, the next time he would be struck, he gets 1 to 8 armor ups instead, and while he has armor ups below this health pool, he has power gain per armor up, which is really nice as a defender because those armor ups sub 15% allow him to to auto block, which is a really bad time if you're the defender, and it is a 100% chance to auto block, which is why he gets that value at 1 sig level. But the higher the sig level, the more amount of molecular armor ups he gets, as well as the higher power gain. But again, I don't really recommend using tech gems on defensive champions, but I would be doing Iron Man a disservice if he didn't make that list. Both of the visions have power gaining mechanics off of awakened abilities, but at this day and age, I just don't think it's worth using awakening gems on vision. But those two champions are absolutely amazing power control champions if you need it, and they both have double immunities if that's what you're looking for. So next up, we'll move on to Cosmic. Cosmic, first up and foremost, we have Hyperion. Hyperion, his buffs last significantly longer once he's awakened. That is the awakened ability. So just at Sig 1, on a 5-star, it's 65.4% increased buff duration. And I say Sig 40-ish is the rough estimate, because if we take a quick look at the curve here, you can see that it is really, really, really curved. So, Sig 40 is about where you start to hit rough of a flat line, and beyond that point, you're really getting diminished returns. So I would highly advise against dumping more than 40 in there, but hey, if you love the champion, go as high as you would like. Captain Marvel movie, upon awakening, gets a indestructibility when she hits binary ignition and has more than 20 energy charges. Now, I say Sig 40 because at Sig 40 is when you get about 9.6 seconds. So to give you an idea, at Sig 1, it's 6 seconds of invulnerability. At Sig 40, you get an additional 3.4 to 3.6 seconds. And at Sig 200, you only get an additional 2.4 seconds. So you get most of your value out of that first 40 to 86 stones, and then the next 120 is straight diminishing returns. It just doesn't feel as good. You're really mostly doing it for either an increased cooldown if you really are trying to use her for long fights, which she's a burst champion, so you shouldn't be. More likely, you're using it for prestige, like me, because my Cat Marvel is going up in 6 stones just for the prestige. Next up, we have Corvus Glaive. Corvus Glaive gets essentially life immunity as long as he has blade charges. So as long as Corvus Glaive has at least 1 blade charge, he cannot die. Instead of dying if he were to be attacked, struck, or hit and die, he would instead lose 4 glaive charges, or only 2 if he does a well-timed block. And the reason this is so good is if you're on a biohazard node, that's a bad example. If you're on the the frostbite node, the node that incinerates you every time, Corvus Glaive can play around that completely. As long as he never gets hit, the incinerates will never kill him. So he can stack as many incinerates as he wants. So yes, it requires a lot of higher skill, but it does allow Corvus Glaive to essentially sit at 1% health every single fight and just pummel opponents SP2 and kill them that way. It's a really cheeky way to clear content, and definitely worth valuing. Next up is Medusa. Now, Medusa at Sig 1 gets the full value out of her Furies, but she doesn't get the full value out of Auto Block. So at Sig 1, Medusa every 3 seconds gets a Fury buff, which stacks up to 3, and the Fury buff is flat rate. The higher Sig level means that she has a higher percentage chance to Auto Block the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th hit in a combo chain when she has 3 Furies. Now, that's mostly a defender thing, so my recommendation is if you're using an Awakening Gem on Medusa, Sig 1 her, call it a day. You're getting the damage, you don't really need the auto block, and it's a good time from there. Next up is Cull Obsidian. His awakened ability mostly is going to help you out in the 1st or 2nd fight, since after that his damage is ramped up enough to the point where you're probably blasting through opponents anyways. But Cull Obsidian is really reliant on having a route buff. Essentially, when he dodges back, holds block, he's able to put a huge attack buff on himself. And in the 1st and 2nd fight, you're going to want to be able to re-trigger that just to kind of make the fight a little bit faster, since that's really where he gets a lot of his value, is once that route buff is active. And he also gets an additional Fury buff when route enters cooldown. And this is really going to expedite that 1st and that 2nd fight. But afterwards, on your 4th or 5th fight, you're probably clearing it in 1 route buff rotation anyways. So that's a feel-good moment. Next up, we have Venom. Venom, once awakened, will get 1 additional genetic memory buff at the start of every fight, and will have a chance to gain a 2nd buff. So you automatically get 1, and at max Sig, you automatically get 2. which is a really good ramp up, a nice way to start every fight. But more importantly, you will also get 5 to 20% increased buff potency from him, which is just going to make him hit overall much, much harder. From here, we have Thor. Thor gets an armor break on well-timed blocks, which the armor break potency goes up the higher his sig level. Ronan, when you see Ronan stun locking people, like high buff champions, it's because he's awakened. His awakened ability, essentially, well, in addition to additional damage for every buff the opponent has, his stuns last additional seconds for every buff the opponent has, which that duration is increased by the sig level. Hela's awakened ability is essentially death immunity or indestructibility upon dying as well. The higher the sig level, the higher the death immunity. She's only on here because if you are a god tier Hela, there are some crazy things that she can do. Phoenix, again, is also an indestructibility upon dying, but she also regenerates health based on the amount of Phoenix charges she has. I believe they're called Phoenix Force charges, my apologies. And the reason she's on here is if you're using like Phoenix and Emma Frost in Alliance Quest and you're trying to use Phoenix as your taxi, she has to be awakened, and you kind of want her at least like Sig 60 to Sig 80 in order to reliably use her as a heal taxi. And then you can really just only use Phoenix to carry your way through an Alliance Quest path, use Emma Frost for immunities paths, and bring a third champion for like boss killers or excessive use from there. Next up is Carnage. Carnage at Sig 1, he gains a power gain if he's near a bleeding opponent, kind of like Blade, but for Carnage it's on his awakened ability, and the higher his Sig level, the higher that power gain rate is. Proxima Midnight, mostly if you have her awakened or you're trying to awaken her, it's for the true accuracy passive effect upon getting 100 hits on the combo meter. So you get that full value at Sig 1, but at higher Sig levels, the Fury that she gets for hitting that 100 attack on the combo meter almost triples at max Sig. So it's definitely worth noting that, you know, it might be worth dumping some extra Sigs if you're going to use her for some lengthy fights. But Proxima Midnight is very slowly finding herself out of rotation just to power creep. Venom the Duck has genetic or aberration effects. So essentially, you'll start and you'll gain your buff a little bit faster at the start of every fight. Special ones will also have an increased siphon effect. Toxic armor will have increased duration. An apparition charge will be gained after every special 3. So when you are hitting your special 3 rotation of Venom the Duck, you'll ramp up buffs just a little bit faster, which is a feel good. Silver Surfer has a 5 to 50% increased buff potency, and the champion, he's got a lot. So the champion, in addition to regenerating health, will be immune to Fate Seal, Heal, Block, Petrify, and any effects that modify regeneration other than poison. While one of his Fury buffs is active, he will also increase the potency of his armor breaks by 80 to 170% based on Sig level. And when he activates 2 or more Fury buffs, this is when he becomes unstoppable, shrugging off the impact of opponent's basic attacks for 5 seconds. So if you're using the champion as a defender, you really want him to be at least awakened in order to get that unstoppable annoyance as a boss champion. And while defending or attacking the final node in a quest, for each active Fury and while his unstoppable buff is active, he regenerates 1 to 2% of the damage taken this fight per second. So again, his awakened ability is what makes him so annoying as a final boss. But again, I don't really recommend using awakening gems on champions for defense. Mystic is finally the last class here, so we can roll through this hopefully fairly quickly. I will make a quick caveat here that Scarlet Witch is for 4 stars only, but she is, in my opinion, the only Mystic champion worth a generic awakening gem, because Scarlet Witch is an absolute monster in the game. But as far as 5 stars go, I don't feel like any of these Mystic's awakening abilities are so game breaking or groundbreaking that I would use a Mystic on a I would use a generic on a Mystic champion. Those generics are honestly just better spent elsewhere, specifically one of these 14 champions instead. For Mystics that are worth a Mystic gem, I do feel Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider gets access to a Fury buff on ending a 5-hit medium combo finisher, and that Fury buff's potency is increased with the signature level, but really you get most of the value just by unlocking it, because that means the rest of all of his Fate Seals, his Judgments will have increased duration just from getting that 1 extra Fury, and that's going to make a huge difference when you're trying to get like long Fate seals, long power drains, or especially long heal phases. Next up is Dr. Voodoo. Dr. Voodoo's Awaken ability means he has either longer buffs on himself or longer debuffs on his opponent, just depending on whether or not you're playing odd or even combos. But you'll start every fight with longer buffs on yourself, meaning longer regeneration at the start of every fight, and it's a huge buff just at Sig 1, and it only gains in Sig level. Next up is Morningstar. I personally feel a lot of Morningstar's value for like utility comes out of her Awaken ability. So when Morningstar is awakened, she grants her a link to her opponent's soul, allowing her to siphon away a portion of the power from any fury, regeneration, or power gain effect. And this is most notable when you're using her to, say, counter any kind of regeneration fight. So like the Act 6.1 Crossbones, I believe it is, you can use Morningstar to one-shot him. It's a long fight, but every time he's regenerating, Morningstar will just passively reduce that regeneration, and instead herself heal a great amount the entire fight. Now it's a slog, but you can just absolutely pummel into that Crossbones for a very long time and save yourself a lot of resources that way. And in this regard, Morningstar works great as an anti-regeneration, so long as the regeneration's not more than her roughly weak damage output. Even ramped up, she's not like the hardest hitter. She's got a good amount of damage, but that is definitely the major flaw for her, is it is a longer fight. Next up is Symbiote Supreme. Symbiote Supreme's Awakened ability is that you get a stagger every 19 to 10 seconds. It just provides him consistency, and if you really are using Symbiote Supreme a lot, that consistency in the stagger is going to make a big difference the more times you use him. The less you use him, the less you'll notice the inconsistency of stagger, but you don't really feel the frustration of not landing a stagger with Symbiote Supreme until you've played an entire fight and gotten all the way up to your special 3 and only had like 1 or 2 staggers, because that's incredibly frustrating. Next up is Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom's major benefit at Sig 1 here is that if the opponent has a power gain and Doom were to nullify that power gain, essentially you would heavier the opponent and nullify the power gain that way, Doom instead gains a power gain, giving him 20% of his maximum power over 3 seconds. And if the opponent isn't shocked when Doom nullifies any buff, they are given a 6-second shock debuff on a 30 to 100% chance of triggering. So the higher the Sig level, the higher the chance that shock will apply, which means when they're shocked, you can get like a nice heavy in to apply another stagger. This will essentially allow you to like stagger lock them in the corner, so long as they don't have power. Next up is Man-Thing. Man-Thing, once awakened, when he's above 50%, whenever he uses a special, he gets a Fury. When he's below 50%, he gains a regeneration. And Man-Thing's biggest weakness is definitely the fact that he's not the hardest hitter in the game. Like most Mystic champions, that's probably their biggest flaw. But that Fury is definitely very helpful in increasing his damage output, and that regeneration is very nice if you're using him in defense. Not so nice if you're using him as an attacker, but hey, it's a little something something. Next up is Magic. Magic's Awakened ability is Limbo on hitting any bar of power, where the higher the Sig level is, the higher the chance of triggering Limbo. Dormammu is whenever a buff expires on the opponent, they were to degenerate. This is mostly a defensive thing as well, but the higher the Sig level is, the more damage the degeneration does. So for both Magic and Dormammu, this is your non-interactive damage as a defender, which is definitely the only value you're getting out of the Awakened ability. There's a little bit more to it than that, but it's definitely mostly a defender awakening. And then next up is Mephisto. Mephisto is a chance when he is struck or when you have a well-timed block to trigger Aura of Incineration. So if you're using him as an attacker, every time you parry, you would instead have a chance to also apply an Aura of Incineration to Mephisto, which also gives you power gain and is going to make your fights a lot faster. And the only reason I have Mephisto all the way down here is I just feel like all of these Mystic champions have strictly better Awakened abilities. But hey, if you have Mephisto and you're using him as a taxi, or you really, really like him, his Awakened ability is solid. It's definitely just Magic and Dormammu who are the strictly defender. Mephisto's is also very, very convenient to have as a defender because it gives him that Aura of Incineration, makes him much, much more frustrating to fight against. But his does have some solid value as an attacker as well. That said, this was a really, really long video. I went super in depth. I just want to make sure that anybody who's reading this or checking out this table knows what each of these champions gets out of an awakened ability, because it's so frustrating for me to have someone be like, hey, I awakened this champion, and that champion to have like no value on their awakened ability. Like, not every champion needs to be awakened, not every champion needs to be high sigged, but some champions need to be high sigged, and if you're not ready to make that commitment, you're just better off holding the awakening gem. And so I want to at least be a source providing that information to the community. And you know, for the most part, the spreadsheet speaks for itself, but hey, maybe my explanation was enough for some people. Maybe you're new to the game and you learned a lot. Maybe you're a veteran to this game and you only listened to the first 20 seconds. Either way, I had a great time making it. You know, I talked way more than I thought I would, but I always do. And I'll talk to you later.